We're here in Monte Carlo for the Rendez-Vous de Septembre. For AMBest TV, I'm Richard Banks. And I'm joined now by Mr. Ramaswamy, who's the General Manager for GIC. Mr. Ramaswamy, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
It's lovely to see you here in Monte Carlo. Now, much of the analysis of the global reinsurance industry that we hear in Monte Carlo tends to focus on North America and Europe. You have a slightly different perspective. Tell us about that.
Sure. So, yes, so when I look at it from the place where I come in from India, and when I look at it from an Asian perspective, yes, there are a lot of things that are common. So when you look at the fact that climate change is a reality today, maybe a few years ago we was talking of things which would happen a few years down the line. Today we don't talk about that anymore. We know that we are right in the midst of climate change, so that affects everybody, it affects us. More importantly, I think as a developing country, protection gap is something that affects us very badly because a lot of the people are not covered by insurance. So that is something that the industry is looking at to see how we can ensure that the protection gap is covered and we manage that well.
So let's talk about that in a little bit more detail. The protection gap has been something of an issue here in Monte Carlo this week. What can the reinsurance industry do to close that gap?
I think in terms of trying to find capacities, maybe at the first level, more importantly looking at solutions that can work. Because when we talk of protection gap, you're talking of a big populace who can't possibly afford insurance today the way it is, and who need to be brought into the insurance network, so that as governments they don't face the problem that a catastrophe happens and most people are not covered. In India, I think what we are doing, what we are planning to do at least, is a kind of a partnership between the government and the insurance and reinsurance sector, where the insurance and reinsurance sector will cover everything, but then at the end of the day, to a great extent, the premiums will come from the government. So the government will subsidize the premium, and it is hoped that the reinsurance fraternity will step in and provide solutions to cover the entire gamut of catastrophe.
So the reinsurance industry in general has quite wide experience of covering that, and that can help in these instances.
Exactly. So the point here is, since reinsurers work around the world, they have different experiences in different parts of the world. They can try and come up with a solution which works specifically for every country, because not every solution works for everyone. So you need to really work out what works best for a particular sector, particular country, particular region. So I think that's where we have a big role to play.
Let's talk about GIC. Tell us about some of the opportunities that you're seeing in the reinsurance sector.
Oh, for us, we do see a lot of opportunities. And when I look at it from an Indian perspective again, so GIC typically writes about 70% of its business from India. We are the national reinsurer for India. And when I look at the market, it's a market which is growing tremendously fast, 15 to 20% year on year. More importantly, the regulator is pushing for more growth, and which is something that most people in this part of the world would find it difficult to understand, because regulators are supposed to control the markets. But then back home, I think the regulator also has a development function, and they're trying to improve the penetration. Like I said, the penetration compared to the Western worlds here, the penetration is pretty low. It is 1% GDP. So they are trying to ensure that the penetration goes up and more and more people come under the ambit of insurance and reinsurance. So we see that as an opportunity. More importantly, the penetration is not happening in the areas where it is already done. It is going into different geographies, so into the rural areas. Plus it is going into sectors which had not seen any growth, so things like surety bonds, things like defect liability insurance, things like the title insurance when it comes to property. So all that is coming up, and we feel that's a good thing for the market, because it allows you to grow across different sectors. Your exposures do not go unnaturally high in one class of business. So that gives us a lot of confidence that this is a market where we can do a lot of things.
One of the topics that comes up every year in Monte Carlo is investor appetite for the reinsurance industry. To what degree is that something that you guys can talk about?
The way we look at it today, maybe even though I think this particular year has been good, touch wood, reasonably benign, but I think investors overall seem to be sitting on the fence, trying to find out how it will move going forward, because honestly last 5-6 years internationally has been bad for the reinsurance market. Back home, yes. Again, we think reinsurance particularly has a good scope because, like I said, the market is growing. But then, barring for three insurance companies who are listed in the market, listed in the capital market, rest are not. So they will have to depend on their private promoters for capital for the growth that they are going to do, which I believe is going to be difficult to come by. So I believe reinsurers have a role to play because they'll be looking at reinsurance solutions. So if reinsurers can, put that kind of capacity in India, I think they will not be disappointed.
Mr. Ramaswamy, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
For AMBest TV, I'm Richard Banks.